it will change the way you communicate with every human being moving forward. Not just in your sales, but in your everyday life. It will change the way that you view conversations. And I guarantee you, it will absolutely make your sales go through the roof. But aside from that, I want to touch on something before we dig in. I am going over the frame here and framing, but I'm not going to teach you fully how to implement it into the sale yet. So remember, these are the principles, and later on, when we get into the more nuanced ideas, the what to say and how to say it, that's when we'll start implementing exactly what to say and how to say it. This is just meant to be the principles to get you guys introduced to these ideas and concepts so that they're not foreign to you when we go over the more nuanced topics that we'll be addressing in later videos to come. And hopefully you guys got in early before the price tag went up and those videos are dropped. All right, let's dig in. Framing. Frame. The frame is the lens through which you view the world. So imagine a camera lens. It's the camera lens through which you identify the entirety of the world. And we're gonna break that down a little bit more, I promise. So what makes up this lens? This lens is created by motivations and beliefs that influence our perception of the world that then manifests itself as narrative. Our motivations and beliefs act as a filter that informs the way that we perceive the world. And this is super important, and here's why. Most people believe that they perceive the world, and then they come up with opinions or motivations and beliefs about what they're perceiving, but it's actually the opposite. So just like I was saying earlier with that camera lens analogy, I guess it would be an analogy. Imagine your motivations and beliefs also act as that lens through which you see the world. So you're actually seeing the world and perceiving the world through the motivations and beliefs that you already have, not seeing the world and then constructing your motivations and beliefs, okay? That's got to be clear to get through before we move forward. Motivations and beliefs are a lens that you're looking through. You're not perceiving the world and then coming up with your motivations and beliefs. Now, that part of the process, when it comes to perception, goes undetected by our conscious brain most of the time until it becomes a narrative or a story in our head. So after we perceive something, we then come up with a story about it. You could be on a hike, and during the hike, you could say it's hot and this sucks and I feel tired. Or you could say in that very same situation, the story that you come up with could be that you get to go and exercise and even get a suntan while you're doing the same exact scenario with different narratives attached to it. Now, this is important, and here's why. First, before we go into that, I want to show you this slide. So keep in mind, perception is more complicated than I'm illustrating here, okay? This is just meant to be a conceptual aid for you to understand framing a little bit better. But you have your beliefs and your motivations, and this is how I think of it in my head, and you can see perception right there, and then you construct a narrative around those beliefs, motivations that you're perceiving. All right, let's give it an example now for sales and how we tie this back into sales. Let's say you're a real estate agent and you're trying to sell a prospect on receiving a 3% commission instead of a 2% commission. For those of you that aren't familiar with real estate, the average, at least in California where I'm from, the average commission for a realtor on either the buying or selling side is usually 3%. That's what everybody's after. However, that 3% is negotiable. So a lot of the times realtors will have to end up taking 2% or 1.5% in order to stay competitive in the marketplace, especially in California. California is super competitive, but that's besides the point. So let's say that the client is trying to get you to take a 2% commission, and obviously that's not advantageous for you. You would like the 3% commission. What story or narrative does that prospect have? Maybe they want to save the most amount of money possible, and they think that the way that they do that would be through taking out of your commission, which seems like a logical conclusion for them to come to. Here's the problem. Most people will immediately hit the one-liner sales tricks and start addressing that. The problem is, if you do that, you're falling into their frame or their story. And once you do that, you've already lost. So a better idea would be to introduce a new frame, and even taking parts of their frame and reconstructing it. Parts of their frame being the motivations and beliefs, and reconstructing it. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say that instead of them saving money on the front end, you're such a good real estate agent that you could save them money on the back end, or make them more money, on the back end. Therefore, it doesn't matter that you're taking more of a commission if the other real estate agent could sell the place for 1.1 million and you're selling it for 1.4, then it doesn't matter that you're taking the extra 1% commission. So all we're doing is we're reframing it and saying, we understand their motivations and beliefs, but we're gonna reframe it to have the right conversation, and have a conversation about what you can give them, and that the money that they'll be saving will come out of the back end of the transaction. So hopefully you're starting to get a little bit of an idea. Like I said, later on in the videos, we're gonna go more into depth about exactly how this works in a sale, but I wanna get you guys used to these concepts and these ideas beforehand. People can only perceive the information through their motivations and beliefs. Our motivations and beliefs dictate the way that we perceive the world around us, and then our brain creates a narrative to make sense of it. That's the simple of it. So when you think frame from now on, think narrative and story. Why is framing the most important concept? I touched on it a little bit, and this is going to be another Ingram that I add in, by the way. Before we go on, how do you take control of a conversation? Write it in the chat. All right, why is framing the most important concept? Because whoever frames the conversation will win on the merits. Whoever frames the conversation, whoever is deciding the overarching story that we're all going to partake in, will win on the merits of that conversation. So if you can properly frame the conversation, you will win on the merits. That's why in our prior example, we don't want to fall into their frame and argue about the 3% commission, but rather shift the attention or the focus or the story or the frame, all of those can be the same thing in this instance, to a place that's more beneficial for us. All right, so now I'm going to show you the breakdown of how communication works. And most people only stay at the top 2, sometimes top 3 levels of this. So first off, you have your direct communication. Your direct communication is quite literally the words that are being said. Then you have your sub-communication. These are the tonalities and the other implications that are nonverbal. Then you have your underlying implications of what those two combined mean. Give an example. So let's say I say, you're really smart. And then I say, you're really smart. I said the same thing, so the direct communication was the same on both, but the sub-communication was different. I indicated through my nonverbal, and my tonality in this case, that the underlying implication of one was that I was being sarcastic and that you're not smart, and with the other one that it was more sincere and that you are perhaps smart. Now we take it one step further and we look at context. If you just said something stupid and I said you're smart, then you could more reliably, with all of that data, conclude that I was probably making fun of you. But if you had just done something really remarkable or aced a test, and I said, you're really smart, then the context can help give us clues or awareness to the fact that I'm being sincere. Now below that, we have your frame or the story. So what story am I producing? So all of these top layers of communication can help us understand what their frame might be or what their story or narrative might be. And below that, you have identity, which we're just scratching the surface on identity, but the next slide, we're going to get a little bit further into identity. Is it the next slide? It might be a few slides. Maybe I don't even cover this in this one. Diagram of human perception. That's where we're going next. All right. The reason, before I even get into that, let me explain to you what this diagram is. So you have actual reality. Actual reality is represented here by this gray bubble that is encompassing everything. It's the darker gray bubble. And then you have your current perception of reality, and you have your expected future reality. So Colette, what do you expect based off of everything you know right now that we're going to be doing after this?
Getting dinner.
Getting dinner. Okay. But not if I get hit by a bus. All right. So I'm tying it in here. Give it a second. So your current perception of reality, based off of all of the things that you know, is that your future reality will entail us getting dinner. But let's say a tragic event occurs before we're able to go get dinner, then we're not getting dinner. In other words, we use the best knowledge that we have at hand to try to predict what the future might be. But none of us have an idea of what the future might be, obviously. Now, where it becomes less obvious is we also don't have a real firm grasp on what actual reality is in our current situation. You could think of two people that have been together for a long time, and at the end of their relationship, or 5 years into their relationship, they find out that their spouse had been cheating the entirety of their relationship. They didn't have all of the data. And that entire time, their perception of reality that they were in a loving, committed relationship was wrong. So we don't even have an idea of what our current reality is, but we're all trying to get as close to actual reality as possible. So this is the reason, fun fact, confidence in a sales works, because people who appear to be outwardly confident are perceived by our brains as being closer to actual reality, which everybody is striving for. Everybody wants to get as close to actual reality as possible. Now, the reason we filter our perception using that lens that we were talking about earlier of our motivations and beliefs is to orient ourselves as close to actual reality as we could possibly manage. So we're all trying to get as close to actual reality. And this is important, like I just stated, because this shows us why confidence works in a sales and why certainty works. It's because it is an outward reflection that the person that you are talking to is closer to actual reality than you are. Therefore, you're more likely or susceptible to trust what they have to say, because you know how far you are from actual reality. I mean, you're a mess, but somebody else might have it all figured out. At least that's what your brain thinks. So that's kind of scratching the surface of how perception works. And this is our last slide. We're going to tie it all back together here. So you have the frame, you have emotions, actions, and reference experience, and this is the flywheel of identity. So you have a story that you tell yourself. That story influences your emotions. Your emotions then influence your actions. Your actions then create a reference experience, and the flywheel continues. The faster this flywheel spins, the stronger the identity that is created becomes. How do we stop this? We're going to get into that in the next set of videos here, but it's something to be acutely aware of, especially in your own life and in your own sale, because you don't want to be affirming the wrong flywheel. You don't want to be affirming the wrong story, because then you'll affirm the wrong emotions, which will then affirm the wrong actions, which will then affirm the wrong reference experiences, and the flywheel continues to grow stronger and stronger and stronger.